Welcome to the channel, guys. We are back again, and today we're going to be talking about Parfums de Marly Sedley, the 2020 reformulation, so stay tuned for that. And if you like the content, guys, hit that like and subscribe button. I really do appreciate it. So, Parfums de Marly released Sedley originally, I believe it was 2019, and there was a lot of complaints. Now, I did actually like the overall fragrance. I did do an original review of this fragrance. I did like the composition, but the performance was a serious problem. It got a lot of complaints from a lot of people. And I also found that typically the performance was lacking, especially considering I would say this is predominantly a spring-summer fragrance. Especially in the heat, I found that this one would just disappear very quickly. So Parfums de Marly decided to listen to the consumer, which I think is great. I think it's awesome when companies do that, and they re-released this in 2020. Now, the official story is that it actually hasn't been reformulated at all. The fragrance is exactly the same, and instead it's been matured longer. So it's been left to sit and macerate for a longer period of time, and that increases the strength and the potency. Unfortunately, I don't still have my sample of the original release of Sedley, so I am going to go off memory for whatever comparisons that I do make. But the interesting thing here is if that is actually true and there's been no reformulation, it's just sat longer. If you do have the original release of Sedley, it should actually still perform better. And I would be interested to hear from somebody who has the original formulation if the performance has gotten better with time as they've worn it, as they've had it, and it's been allowed to sit for a longer period of time. Because essentially that is what they're saying has led to the increased performance. Now, I'm going to talk about this fragrance, I'm going to talk about the composition, and I'm going to talk about the performance. I am going to do a little bit of a comparison with what I remember from the original 2019. Now, I do remember quite well the performance, so that's going to be the crucial aspect for a lot of people. And I'm going to be, I think I'm well equipped to discuss that. So before I get into the actual composition, let me show you the presentation. This is one of the things I actually loved about this particular release. It does have a really gorgeous presentation. Of course, it does have the typical Parfums de Marly bottle, which I do generally enjoy. I think it's very classy, very luxurious looking. It has the horses on it, and of course the very heavy cap. I don't know about everyone else's cap, but my cap, this is the 2020 version, sticks on the bottle quite a bit, so it actually takes a little bit more force than my Wajan or my Galloway to take off, so it is stuck on there pretty firmly. Cap, as always, very heavy, but the really cool thing, this is a nice sort of bluish bottle, and it is see-through. It's a nice clear bottle, which does have a really nice classy look to it, so I do really like that. And here is, of course, the box. Nice box. I wish it had the pedestal as in Wajan, because I like those a lot for presentation purposes, but this one doesn't come with that. Anyways, into the fragrance. Now, this is actually a very fresh composition, and on the initial burst, I do actually get a little bit of fizziness, which is really interesting. So it almost has this soda pop like fizziness. It doesn't smell like soda pop, but it does have an actual fizziness there, which gives off a very fresh impression. Now, as that fizziness does start to tone down a little bit, I definitely do get a little bit of the bergamot. It has a bit of a juicy quality to it, but that very quickly gives way to a sort of minty freshness. Now, the mintiness in this composition to me is not at all like crypto mint or anything. It's not a very minty kind of a vibe. Rather, for me, what I get is a crispness, a little bit of freshness, and of course a little bit of a smell of mint. And in fact, it does remind me a little bit of the mint that's in Creed Viking. Now, it's a little bit different. I do find that in the Viking composition, there's definitely a little bit of a cooling effect, and I don't really get that cooling effect so much with Sedley, but it does have this really nice fresh accord, which adds a very nice crispness. So I really do enjoy that crispness. Now, with that, especially in the opening, I do get kind of a greenish vibe. And it's weird because this is also kind of a bluish fragrance, so it does give me a kind of greenish vibe without being a green fragrance, and it doesn't come off to me either entirely blue either. Now there is, I believe, ambroxan in this. On the listed notes it says there's a watery accord. To me that's interesting too, because what I get from that is almost like a jello-y freshness. Now, it does have a little bit of that sleek freshness that Sauvage has without smelling like Sauvage. And I do like that about it, so it's very, very fresh on the opening. And it definitely has a very clean, crisp vibe. Now, I do also get lavender, and the lavender actually stays with the composition for the entirety of the fragrance. That mint, that crispness, and even that ambroxan freshness does eventually die off. And what I really get from the drydown is surprisingly much more woody. So in the opening, I don't get much of the woods. I know this is a woody fragrance as well, but to me, I start to get a little bit of the woods in the mid and a lot more in the drydown. And the woods is actually a nice sort of counterbalance, and in fact, the composition changes quite a bit. So it has that crisp green sort of freshness, as I mentioned in the opening, a minty, nice, almost jello-like accord. And then it transitions to more of a dry cedar or a dry woody vibe with lavender. So predominantly what I get in the drydown, and this is several hours after application, so it does have, that nice minty crispness for a long time. 4 or 5 hours into the fragrance, this definitely turns out to me more of a lavender and wood fragrance. And it is quite a bit drier. So the opening, it does have, like I mentioned, this watery accord, but to me it doesn't come off full on watery. It's more of a jello-y vibe, which is interesting, and it does make it, it does give it a little bit of a synthetic vibe, but not in a bad way. It doesn't smell harsh in that sense, but because it is a sort of jello-y freshness, it's hard to relate it to an actual smell of something like, say, bergamot or lavender or whatever the case may be. It doesn't come off as a natural ingredient. And in fact, if, ambroxan is actually used in this fragrance, then it's not a natural ingredient, so you wouldn't really expect that. But anyways, I do actually really enjoy this fragrance. It's a little bit sweet in the opening. It's fresh, it's crisp, it's minty, and then it dries down into a nice woody lavender. Now, as far as I remember, this is pretty much what I remember the fragrance smelling like the first time I tried it and with the original formulation. I do think the woodiness comes off a little drier in the deep drydown than I recall, but that's where the performance difference also, I think, comes in. This fragrance performs much, much better. This is a fragrance that I constantly hear about how strong it actually is, and that's with only a few sprays. So this one, to me, seems to encapsulate more of the Parfums de Marly style that I think a lot of people are familiar with, and that is, a beast mode fragrance. It's very strong, a couple sprays, and it projects really, really well. The sillage is superb on this fragrance, so it definitely lingers in the air for a very long time. And I would actually say that projection and sillage is quite strong for probably about 4 hours. And it isn't really until the fresh, crisp aspects start to really tone down that the projection and the sillage also starts to tone down. And I think, the longevity is typically I will get a solid 8 hours out of this. And I have worn it outside in about 22 degrees Celsius, which is not super hot, but it's definitely quite warm. And it has held up also in those temperatures. So it doesn't, one of the problems I had with the originals, I wore it out when it was hot. Exactly the time you would want to wear this fragrance, or you would think about putting this on, because it is minty and refreshing. So in those cases, it evaporated almost right away. Not so with this fragrance, so I would generally give it an 8+ hours for the longevity. So definitely is there with longevity. Projection and sillage also quite strong. My only real complaint in that aspect is, as somebody who's wearing the fragrance, it doesn't smell anywhere near as strong, and I know that is typically the case with fragrances. It's very pronounced with this fragrance, and I do sometimes go a little anosmic to this fragrance, especially the first couple times I wore it. I'd sniff it, I'd go back, sniff it again right after, and it seemed to get weaker every single time I smelt it. So this one does have an anosmic effect, but it's there. This is the one that if you ask people around you to constantly, evaluate, can they smell it, you will get feedback for quite some time. So I think they've managed to fix the performance issues with this fragrance, which I'm very happy about, because it is, I think it's actually a fairly unique summer fragrance and a good release from Parfums de Marly, and I know a lot of people complained about the performance, and for a lot of people that was the complaint. Now personally, I did manage to get this at a cheap price, so I found this very reliable seller on the Parfums de Marly Facebook group, and I got it for a very, very good price. I think around half price. So this retails at a very expensive price, I think around $300, which it's always hard for me to justify really any fragrance at that price, but I don't know that I definitely would not pay $300 for this fragrance. But I think at the gray market prices, this one is definitely fair, and it will probably go down a little bit. So I know Calan was a little bit more expensive when it was first released, and I think it's maybe going down in price to match Leighton and all the other ones, but it can be gotten for a fairly reasonable price on the gray market. Just make sure, of course, as always, that you are getting a reliable seller, and don't just trust anybody if you do go that route. So finally, I guess I'll go into the occasions for this one. Definitely a spring summer fragrance. You could wear it in fall. It is strong enough for winter in my opinion, but it doesn't really suit the occasion unless you really just want to wear something fresh in the winter. Unless of course you're in the absolutely crazy cold, then probably wouldn't work. But it does have a nice bit of sweetness there. And I find that it doesn't, even when it's warm out, get particularly cloying, because the sweetness is fairly subtle. It's not a really strong sweetness. It is a present sweetness, but it's not something that becomes too cloying in the heat. So this is definitely a spring summer fragrance. To me, it's more casual. Now, I don't know why you couldn't wear this in more formal occasions, but this to me is definitely a more casual fragrance. It's light, it's fresh, it's fairly carefree in my opinion, and it is relaxing as well. So I think this is a really great spring summer, just going out, having fun or whatever kind of a fragrance. Definitely good for the warmth, definitely good for the heat. You can of course wear it in the evening too, but I think that fresh, crisp mint with a little bit of sweetness is really nice for the heat. I think I'm going to cut the video there, guys. That's it for this one. I hope you liked the video. If you did, of course, hit that like and subscribe button, and leave a comment down below. Did you like Sedley but you were disappointed with the original performance? Have you tried this one? Do you find it has better performance, or do you just not like any of the fresh fragrance from Parfums de Marly? I know that a lot of people like the heavier scents from Parfums de Marly, but I think that their fresh fragrances are also quite good. Anyways, that's it for this one, guys. Hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.